What if I told you that the attacks of September 11th, 2001 weren't just the result of al-Qaeda's planning, but also of America's own blind spots? That the world's most powerful intelligence agencies actually had pieces of the puzzle, but failed to put them together? It sounds shocking, but that's exactly what the 9/11 Commission report and later investigations revealed. Not a grand conspiracy, not a secret government plot, but something in some ways even more disturbing. A system so fragmented, so bogged down by bureaucracy and blind spots, that it missed multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack on U.S. soil. In this video, we'll break down the hidden failures of intelligence leading up to 9/11, why those failures happened, and how they reshaped everything from government structure to the way we think about security today. Let's start with the part that continues to haunt investigators more than 2 decades later, the warnings. Because here's the unsettling truth. The United States actually had pieces of the puzzle before September 11th. The CIA and FBI both held fragments of intelligence that, if combined, could have revealed the outline of the plot. Take Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, 2 men who would later board American Airlines Flight 77, the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. U.S. intelligence agencies knew their names. They even knew they had attended an al-Qaeda meeting in Malaysia in early 2000. And still, they managed to enter the United States freely, obtain driver's licenses, and live openly in places like San Diego. The CIA had flagged them. The FBI had leads. But the information never connected. And it wasn't just about individuals. There were hints of something bigger. Intercepts and reports mentioned the use of airplanes in potential terrorist plots. Foreign partners raised alarms about possible attacks. Even U.S. agents were filing reports about men suspiciously enrolling in American flight schools, despite having little interest in learning how to land a plane. In hindsight, the clues are almost screaming from the page. So why wasn't action taken? Why weren't the dots connected? The Commission's answer was chilling. The agencies were operating in silos. The CIA guarded its intelligence closely. The FBI treated its field reports like isolated case files. And between them stood what officials often called the wall, a mix of legal restrictions, bureaucratic inertia, and cultural mistrust that prevented meaningful collaboration. Think about that. The world's most advanced intelligence apparatus wasn't crippled by a lack of data, but by its inability, or unwillingness, to share what it had. In many cases, information sat on desks, trapped in memos, or buried in files that never reached the right people at the right time. Some agents were raising red flags, but their warnings got stuck in a system not built to handle threats that crossed agency lines. And here's the tragic irony. Had those dots been connected, the plot might have been stopped. Instead, the intelligence failures piled up, unnoticed until it was too late. The cost of those missed warnings wasn't just a bureaucratic embarrassment. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost in a single morning. Another phrase from the 9/11 Commission report has become infamous: a failure of imagination. And it captures one of the most devastating aspects of how the attacks unfolded. Hijackings weren't new in 2001. Airplanes had been taken before, sometimes for ransom, sometimes for political leverage, sometimes to stage a dramatic escape, but the pattern was always the same. The goal was to bargain, not to die. So when intelligence officials thought about hijackings, that was the model in their heads. Passengers would be hostages. Planes would be bargaining chips. What no one in the intelligence community truly envisioned was this: hijackers who didn't want concessions at all. Hijackers who intended to use the planes themselves as weapons, transforming them into guided missiles aimed at American landmarks. And here's the unsettling part, there were warnings. Some intelligence reports did mention the possibility of using airplanes as weapons. The concept wasn't completely alien, but the warnings were brushed aside, buried under the assumption that no terrorist group would actually pull something like that off. Why? Because it didn't fit the established playbook. It sounded too extreme, too cinematic, too unthinkable. That's the heart of the failure of imagination. We prepare for the threats we've seen before, not the ones that force us to think outside of our own assumptions. It's almost human nature to measure risk by past experience. And yet, for al-Qaeda, that blind spot was the perfect opening. They didn't need to invent a new weapon, they just had to use the one everyone else overlooked. In hindsight, it's easy to see how devastating that failure was. The United States had the resources, the intelligence, and the means to counter terrorism. But imagination? That was the missing piece. And without it, no one was prepared for what came next. Here's another uncomfortable truth. The U.S. intelligence community knew al-Qaeda was a threat. Osama bin Laden had already declared war on America. Al-Qaeda had carried out embassy bombings in Africa in 1998 and the USS Cole attack in 2000. They weren't an unknown group hiding in the shadows. But what the agencies underestimated was their reach and ambition. Many analysts believed al-Qaeda was dangerous overseas, but lacked the capability to carry out something so devastating inside the U.S. homeland. That underestimation meant resources and focus weren't where they should have been. Budgets and attention were still spread thin across Cold War-style priorities, while a growing and determined terrorist network slipped through the cracks. The FBI, in particular, came under harsh criticism. A 2002 Inspector General report revealed that the Bureau failed to act on credible leads. Tips about suspicious individuals, including men linked to flight schools, weren't properly investigated. Even worse, the FBI had a serious information management problem. Field offices weren't effectively sharing intelligence with each other. Leads would die in one office and never reach another where they might have been connected to a larger pattern. One of the clearest examples? Agents had information about men with links to al-Qaeda attending flight schools in the US. They raised alarms. But because of bureaucratic hurdles and lack of coordination, the warnings never escalated to prevent the hijackings. It wasn't malice. It wasn't a cover-up. It was dysfunctional. Zooming out, these weren't just individual errors. They were systemic flaws. The U.S. intelligence community was fragmented and decentralized, with multiple agencies competing rather than collaborating. There was no single point of coordination, no central hub where all the intelligence could be fused together. Everyone had part of the picture, but no one had the whole canvas. On top of that, legal and bureaucratic constraints made proactive counterterrorism difficult. Laws like FISA limited surveillance powers in ways that made sense during the Cold War, but left gaps when it came to fast-moving non-state terrorist groups. Add to that insufficient resources and a culture not yet adapted to modern terrorism, and you had a system simply not built to prevent what happened on September 11th. If 9/11 exposed the failures, the years after were all about fixing them. Some reforms were controversial, others fundamentally reshaped American security. The Director of National Intelligence, DNI, position was created to unify the intelligence community and force coordination between agencies. The Information Sharing Environment, ISE, was built to break down silos and allow data to flow across the FBI, CIA, NSA, and other organizations. Fusion centers and databases made it harder for critical pieces of intelligence to get lost. legal authorities expanded too. The Patriot Act broadened surveillance powers, giving agencies tools they hadn't had before, though at the cost of sparking major debates over privacy and civil liberties. And within the agencies themselves, there was a cultural shift. Training expanded. Counterterrorism became the priority. Analysts were taught to challenge assumptions, to imagine the unthinkable, and to prepare for threats outside the traditional playbook. Experts today agree. 9/11 wasn't the failure of a single agent or a single office. It was the failure of a system weighed down by bureaucracy, outdated frameworks, and human blind spots. The tragedy forced intelligence agencies to evolve. Today, with advanced technology, data fusion, and a focus on prevention, the system is stronger, but it's far from perfect. Analysts now talk about known unknowns, the idea that the greatest threats often come from places we're not expecting. That lesson was written in the blood of 9/11. And yet, even with all these reforms, the fundamental challenge remains. How do you prevent the unimaginable when, by definition, it doesn't fit your expectations? The story of 9/11 is often told as one of terrorism and tragedy, but it's also a story of intelligence failure, of missed warnings, of agencies that didn't talk to each other, of a government that couldn't imagine what its enemies were capable of. These weren't failures of a few bad actors. They were failures of structure, culture, and imagination. And while reforms since then have reshaped intelligence and security, the lessons of 9/11 remain a sobering reminder that even the most powerful systems can break down. So the question we're left with is this: have we truly learned from those failures, or are we just waiting for the next blind spot to be exposed? Events of intelligence failure, like September 11th in the US or Mumbai attacks in India, are the same kind of terror attacks which raise questions by the public about security failures. Hit the like button if you're curious like us and subscribe to our channel to keep the track of global queries like 9/11.